Greetings, my friends. This is Maerlande. My guest today, once again, is Sombre, and we're going to talk about the Warhammer Dark Elves mod. Go ahead, Sombre.
Hello. I think we're going to talk about Empire, though, aren't we?
Empire. My error there. It is actually Empire, and the Altdorf nation within the three nations of Empire. So I will open up the test game. So this was, I've done, what have I done? 17 turns. And you can kind of see I've purchased a little bit of everything. I've expanded tremendously. I'll open up the graphs here. You can see that, I've overwhelmed the poor AIs.
Yeah, it's pretty great expansion.
Mm-hmm.
I think you were finding that you had no shortage of gold.
No, floating in it. I've got 3,000 here. I bought, for the first time, I bought one of the, this I think is the second of these War Altars. So I sent one out. I think it's down here. Yeah, to try to fight with it. We could kind of go over that. I've purchased each of the different kinds of retinue statues. So the Reichsguard, somewhere around here I've got the other ones. It's been a week or so. Yeah.
And I think you also had I'm forgetting the orders now. Order of the Griffin and
the Blazing Sun. Yeah. So I bought one of each, and every single one of them has wandered around more or less with no loss. Sometimes I've supported them, sometimes I haven't. So, and then of course, now my build, you could see, was very simple. This was just an immobile for a bit of a mage bless, but it was reminded, I think it was you reminded me that I went for Arcane Finesse, which isn't really relevant.
Mage.
Well, because none of the Magi are sacred, so that's not going to really amount to a hill of beans.
Yeah. But yeah, for a test game, it obviously doesn't matter so much. I think actually it's quite a good idea when people are first testing out a nation if they just they don't actually worry too much about kind of going, oh, what's the perfect pretender design for this? It's often quite a good idea to just throw some scales on there and kind of a generic bless and just see how they go.
Well, I usually do that sort of methodology I've used for ages of sort of looking over the commanders, sort of looking at the paths. With this nation, you've got pretty much every path in the game. You've got some very interesting commanders with unique abilities. I know this one, Snow Move and Animal Awe on an Earth Nature Wizard. So what are you going to really do with that? I don't know. Other than just using it as a mage. Oh, he's got some extra abilities.
Yeah, he actually, the Amber Wizards have a second form when they're in a forest. Which, if you're in a forest when you recruit them, I think you'd see it immediately. But of course,
yeah. So here's one here. I think.
That's
a jade. Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know how many ambers I bought, if any, yet, and so I've got a few forts underway. Another one coming up over here. That's another jade, which are pretty cost-effective site searchers. And so, going over it, I've tried a little bit of everything. You don't have, one thing that's interesting, I noticed, you don't have one of those 4 commander point super magi.
Oh.
And
but you do... Sorry, go ahead.
Well, you've got some capital onlys, I think, if we look at the pretenders and the overview screen.
I think for Altdorf, your only capital onlys, you have the War Altar, which is the H3, and I think he's slowed to recruit, I'm pretty sure.
He is, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, but then none of your mages are, and I think the Scholar is cap only, and maybe the H3, the Lector without the War Altar.
The Scholar and the Lector, yeah, that's it. So those 3. But none of them are sort of one of those gigantic, and then the Scholar I chose not to use. I looked at it and I thought, okay, do I want to go Sloth? And I looked at everything else in the nation and went, no, I don't want to go Sloth. I don't think I'm sure you could make a Sloth play.
I think you could, because obviously a big point about having good production, good resources, is that it allows you to bypass the kind of some of the limits, things that are limiting you on getting troops early on. And
That's right.
If you were just using your order knights and your infantry and things, there's quite a few of them that are quite resource expensive. But you can also go with flagellants, free infantry, and then build the statues, which really bypass. They're a bit like mercenaries in that they bypass recruitment points and resource points, and you can just throw gold at something.
I found that they didn't really bypass resource points, for the simple reason is at 120 to what's the higher ones? I think
that's true. Yeah.
They plug your mage recruitment up for multiple turns, and you don't really want that.
Yeah.
So, because if you were to pick, if you're sitting there with slot 3, maybe you got 60 resources in your capital. This guy's taking 2 turns. That's basically wasting a capital recruitment turn. So
that's very true.
So I found that didn't really work. See, my capital now with everything around it captured is sitting at, where are we at? 233 resources.
So you'd have no problem making one and some other things every turn.
Absolutely. But if I was sitting at order 0, you'd probably be okay. But I think at sloth, you would effectively struggle to build these guys.
Yeah, you'd need to be using almost a whole cap circle worth of resources, I think, to go on out.
And
you can make them outside of your cap, though.
You can you? Okay.
Yeah, in other forts.
Yes,
so if you find a fort on top of a I forget what they're called, but one of the sites that gives you extra resources, and it's in a mountain province, so it's got forests nearby it and things.
Iron Mine, I think, if I remember correctly. So things went really smoothly. I mean, if we look at here's a simple fight. This is just the original Reichsguard, and can't remember. Let's see what they fought. I don't think it's anything too stunning. Well, actually, that's a pretty big independent army.
It's a relatively tough one, yeah, because there's a heavy cav, right? They're not knights, but they're still pretty nasty.
But they just expect them to.
Yeah, I'd expect them to do nothing against Reichsguard.
No, because they've got the awe. It's sun awe, but in darkness, and they just wipe it right out.
People talk about a lot is kind of layers of defense, and if you have multiple layers of defense, then you become to normal troops almost unkillable. And the Reichsguard are actually quite a good example of that, because you've got quite high defense, including your shield, but because they're mounted, good defense. You've got ore as your first line of defense, which is preventing you from getting harassment penalties and things, and then you've got very high protection, so they're really tough for an ordinary troop to kill.
And they hit really hard. I mean, the lance is a full lance, so a one-shot, but even after that, they've got good attack skill. 12 is very good. So, yeah, they are very effective. And
disadvantage to them is the gold efficiency of getting them is quite bad. Because I think the statue is 1,500.
Well, so what are we at? He gets a dozen. Yeah, that's pricey. That's 80 gold a pop, something along those lines.
You get the commander, of course, as well.
Right, but there's not much to compare them to unless you compare them to the, I'm trying to remember the name, the top-end unicorn riders of Middle-Aged Man. And
Knights of Avalon.
Yeah, or the Almish Black Lord, or Black Lord Cavalry. And they're at the
kind of interesting to see how they match up with Black Knights, the Middle-Age Ulm Knights. I think that stats-wise, the Black Knights are a chunk better. They've got more hit points and strength, and I think the same attack skill and defense skill, or maybe a bit more.
They're very comparable. I think Black Knights are a little bit higher protection.
Yeah, possibly. I think the Black Knights have better helmets, and I think everything else is roughly the same. Maybe the Black Steel's a bit better than the Empire Full Plate, but they're very similar.
They're very similar. And then the Knights of Avalon have the Alicorn, so a magic weapon instead of the
Helm. And they've got that's 3 attacks per turn. So they're even better after the charge, aren't they? Avalon.
And then I can't hardly kill these things. The Demigriffs. I mean, they just wander around doing their thing. I sent like 4 of them same idea as this. Put with some armored commander, a single one on guard commander, have them on the flank, and that was highly effective. We can sort of prep that and do a little bit of a demo of that again. Now the War Altar really didn't work. I think it would work better if it was brought along with infantry, if you're going to fight with it. Because
I saw the way you were using that, and I was puzzled. I think that I've seen someone else take it, kind of be a bit kind of nonplussed by that commander before as well, because they look at it and they think, okay, this is a big sacred chariot, so it's trampling people. It's got trampling. Right. It's really not. It's quite bad as a trampler or a.
Well, the combat speed is really the problem. 10 is awfully slow for a trampler. Much too slow. It could have sat back and just done smites and probably would have been more effective.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing that it unlocks for you is just that it has Dominion Spreader, which is not something that you can normally. I don't think any of the nations in Dominions have access to Dominion Spreader except through you've got your Prophet, of course.
There's a
Juggernaut.
There's a monkey summon.
Okay, they have one too.
The Devala, but it's Conjuration 8 or 9.
Yeah, and the Juggernaut is also high construction. Is it Construction 8 or something?
Right. And
so can't normally really funnel gold into it.
No. So, but I made one, and I thought, well, what will I try to do with it? And I saw the trample, but at first I didn't look close enough at the combat speed. So, on the other hand, I mean, if the what do we call them? The legate standing on top of it is killed, it comes back, so you don't lose it. The Arc Lector.
Yeah.
Sorry. So you could use it. It reminded me in the tournament series of watching those Masushus.
Yes.
And how cost effective they ended up being compared to, say, elephants, because their second form is still crazy tough. And if it does survive, you get them back.
You don't even have to worry about afflictions, because they kind of fix their afflictions as they switch back between the shapes.
Right, exactly. So that was the idea behind that one. If we so I might grab that guy. Let's just change up that script and stick him here and just have him cast a Divine Bless and then smite like crazy.
One of the benefits of just having him there in the fights is, so firstly you've got, as you're moving an army around, you're more likely to end up in neutral or positive dominion, because you've got the dom spread and you can control where that's going by him moving around. He also he gives you some free flagellants in every fight. I think it's... Yeah, he's got a retinue of.
That's your.
You have a look at him.
Yeah. Yeah, he's got the 2d6 flagellants.
Yeah. Which isn't it's not nothing. Useful as a kind of like a bit of a distraction. If you have a good bless, it's not bad either. If you have like a sacrificial bless, like charge body, blood vengeance, sort of
exploding body or something. Yeah,
exploding body.
But let's we got anything tough here? Some knights. Okay, let's just watch these guys, see what happens if they take some knights. We'll watch.
I think knights would do a little better because the better morale on them. I think they're morale 12, aren't they, or 13 knights?
And I bounced something off a couple turns back off these lizards. It was just a generic bunch. I quite like the Reichsguard foot. These guys, they're solid.
I was kind of interested that this is a nation that I first made for Dominions 3, and so over various updates and between the different games, it's a long time. Things have changed quite a lot between the games. So one of the things is that this used to be, a fairly heavy cavalry based nation, and heavy cavalry used to be fairly bad in Dominions 3. They really generally were not particularly popular.
Right.
And in Dominions 5, I think they're very dominant in the late game, but in expansion and in early wars, they're really strong. And Empire has a lot of those. It has high protection, and again, high protection used to be high protection, high encumbrance armor used to be quite terrible in Dominions 3, and in Dominions 5, it's very strong.
Well, they reduced the kind of critical hits, and the other thing is there was a major nerf to rust and destruction.
Yes.
A little bit hard to understand at times when you first look at it, but it is a pretty significant nerf.
think destruction used to immediately strip off all of the armor,
Right.
whereas now it just damages it so that the first hit that the thing takes knocks the armor off unless it's magic.
Well, but even the first hit is not an automatic.
Oh, okay. So it's got a
There's
chance
a dice roll.
to
Yeah, and it doesn't always work. See, these guys here again. Oh, that. Oh, yeah, well, that's a pretty tough fight. So I lost a few of the Blazing Sun, but they've already taken out a whole pile of provinces with hardly a touch. So
I particularly like their leader too, because he's got the area effect on his lance charge.
That's right, which is kind of crazy. Yeah, this is a kind of an interesting one to watch, just briefly. So I set her back just a little bit.
Kills.
Well, she should have had some good lightning, and I think it was the lightning that was the problem.
If they get orb lightning,
no,
don't they?
mine burns. Yeah, so it was the mine burns, basically. But even so, Pegasus riders aren't a joke. They're not amazing, but they're not a joke.
Yeah, once you kind of reach their line, they actually can be pretty nasty, just because they hit you with the light lance.
Yeah, their disadvantage is size 4, so that's a significant disadvantage. And there you go. There's that. Yeah, so that was highly effective, but it was the mine burns. So
and that is a disadvantage generally of Empire stuff, is that apart from the fantastic magic diversity of wizards, as you said, but they are just humans, they're troops.
Yes.
So, you know, a cavalry where you're working out as maybe you've bought one of the statues and it's ended up as maybe like 70, 80 gold per cavalryman, then a mine burn kills one in one shot. That's pretty nasty.
Well, I think getting them as a complete formation in a single purchase for a single turn, if you save up your resources and your gold, pays off for paying a little bit more, because then you're not trickling out your cavalry in small chunks. And I think that's a good mechanic. It seems to work very well. I don't think it's overpowered. I'm only playing against crappy AIs, so.
Of course, yeah. I found that when I first kind of made that mechanic, I thought that it would be. I mean, it's gone through a few iterations, but I always felt that it would be quite hard to balance. But it's turned out to be okay, and I've been surprised kind of how much gold it can cost and still be attractive and a good option. Like when you're talking about a kind of an immediate reaction to going, 1,500 gold, and you get a commander and some knights. Well, that's
right.
That's quite overpriced for what they are. But then, of course, it's the convenience in terms of being able to just go, wow, here's a force that can expand and really be quite dangerous.
Yeah, here's an expansion party. Boom, it's ready to go, and off it goes. A little bit of scripting, and it doesn't need any support for most things. I mean, I'm just going to try something, even though they're a little bit weakened. I'm going to see what happens if they try taking out
some barbarians.
Yeah. Now, the fire resistance, if I was doing this besides just a test where I'm trying each one, I would have selected whichever one of these I purchased to suit who I was fighting.
Yeah.
So I think chances are the Sun Awe is probably the most generally useful on the Reichsguard when you're doing expansion. But I'm trying to remember where they are. But there's also
Reichsguard, bottom right.
But I think it was the Hunters have some nice secondary benefits. But one thing you can't really see here is until you bought them, you can't see all the details. So
that's something that I want to change for the next update of this mod. Is something I've been doing in other mods. I didn't do it for the Dark Elves, and it's not done for the Empire yet. But I'm adding Future Sight, which is a mechanic that's used in, I think it's in Ubar, in Vanilla.
Oh,
and it's so that you can see a site that you will get in the future on the nation overview screen, so that you can make more informed decisions about a nation.
Right, because it would be really nice to, because the small differences in the secondary abilities of these 4 retinue type tributes are significant and could be very useful in determining which one you want to purchase, because they're more or less in the same ballpark. Well, the Hunters are significantly cheaper.
Yeah, they're certainly individually the weakest, especially like expansion and things. They're a bit lower protection, and so on.
I think
they're the ones map move compared to the others, from what I remember.
I think they're the ones that died here coming on the lizards. I didn't archive any of these turds, but let's just pop through and see. Those are just scouts. probably just.
So I should just say with the future sites, the idea there is that when you go to the nation overview screen, you can then see the various sites that your nation has, and there'll be some ones that are greyed out, and they say your nation may get this in the future. And rather than being a site that you get in the future, I just use like a dummy site.
Okay.
And that will tell you, you have one that's called like a Knight Statue Summons, and then it can show you all of the individual things that you'll get.
That would be very useful, because otherwise probably what you'll do is you'll make a small game like I did, buy all 4, and then jump back to it as a reference point, which is great for people like me that run Dominions outside of Steam, so that I can use multiple instances and look at prior turns at the same time I'm on a current turn. But I do all kinds of complicated manual maneuvers to save my game folders so that I can look up previous stuff and for recording and so on. Most people that are now playing on the Direct Connect bots, you don't have a very good option to look at past turns. And I find that a bit of a loss, because I've always played by going back and seeing, how many gems did I cast this global with? Or, well, what did he do last time when I scripted against him? And
can be very useful, and you can do things like you can see, he had a mage that was in this province 2 turns ago, that like I pinged it with a scout. Was he carrying any gems?
Right.
And you can just go back and have a look.
Exactly. So, now what am I buying here? Okay, well, that's brand. I'm not going to buy more of those. I'm going to go back to Magi.
As a general principle, I'm trying to make my mods kind of more accessible to people, and less kind of there'd be a little bit less mystery in there. So I'm trying to have the mechanics a bit more explicitly explained sometimes. I'll kind of put those in the end of descriptions in brackets.
Right.
And I'm trying to add these sites so that you can see the different summons that you'll get, the different heroes you can get. Because I watch people doing like nation overviews, and they'll often have to load things up in the mod inspector to say like, here's the heroes you get and so on.
Yeah, exactly.
It would be nice if they could just do that all in the game. So I'm going to change all of my mods so that you can see from within the game like as much as possible, really, to make decisions.
Well, one of the things Illwinter, I believe, likes to do is keep some mystery, some exploration flavor. But they've now got Conquest of Elysium that provides an easier way to do that, and is a lower commitment in terms of you're only going to play it for a few hours a game. You're not going to play for 6 months. But with the modded nation, I think it's safe to assume that anybody who's going to find that modded nation and play it already knows this game very well, or has a pretty good grasp of it. And the only mystery will be the uniqueness of that modded nation. So I don't think your audience is a fairly sophisticated audience when you're building a mod nation.
Yeah, I think that's generally true, and I think there is room for mystery. A lot of the games that are my favourite games are quite, Dominions is sort of one of them. Have this element of mystery about them, like the Dark Souls games and things like that, where there's a feeling of exploration and discovery as you're playing. But I do think that on the balance, I prefer to make things kind of a bit more explicit to the player and let them go and look at the information. People who'd rather have it be a surprise, they don't have to go and look at it as well.
There's that as well.
The player the choice.
Okay, so I'm curious to see. Okay, here's the lizards. So Reiksguard Foot took out 36 lizard warriors. That's pretty impressive.
It's not bad.
Most basic infantry get chewed up pretty good by lizards.
I would say they're comparable with MA Ulms, with Middle Era Ulms infantry. I think in terms of Dominions, they're probably one of the closest things to them is the Landless Knights that Man gets, but they are better than the Landless Knights. They have significantly more protection, for instance.
Yes. Well, I looked at going with the Great Swords. You'd mentioned them, but if we could look back, but if I remember right, they're a little bit more resources and don't have the shield. So when you're trying to chop up something really tough, that would be better. But against most independents, there's very few independents with a great deal of protection.
I think it depends greatly on what you're expecting to fight, and the thing that people forget to look at is what the length of the weapons are on the thing you're expecting to fight. Because if you're fighting, so these guys actually will have longer weapons than the broadsword. I think the trident is length 2.
Yes,
it might be length 3.
I believe it's 2. No, it's 3.
It's 3, right. So the trident, you're not going to outrange that with the broadsword. You do get to repel when they make their bite attack, which is why the bite attack is kind of actually not as good as you might think.
Yeah.
If you have the greatsword, if you're fighting things with broadswords, for instance, and you've got a greatsword, I believe greatswords are length 2, so you get to make repel checks on them. And even if you're only stopping 20%, let's say, of the attacks on you, that's just eliminating 20% of the attacks that are happening in the combat, coming from the opponent just because you've got a slightly longer weapon.
Well, and there's a bit of a difference between sort of purchasing what you think you need for expansion, because you got to kind of cover all your bases. Because you're not going to go back and replace your troops in between moving from one province to the next. So, whereas if you're actually in a war with another nation, you're going to know the types of things they're going to bring out. Then you'll purchase exactly the right kinds of units for that if you have that selection. And this nation has a very broad selection of available units. So, for lots of different possibilities. So here's the great swords are 39. And these guys are 41, so it's very, very similar.
Quite a bit more survivable though, because of the shield. It does make quite a big difference. And the greatsword has just an iron cap on the head, which is a little bit lower protection. I think the Reichsguard have full helmet. It's either half helmet or full helmet.
The Reichsguard, the full helmet, so 21, plus a pretty good shield.
So quite a bit more likely to survive, just kind of the chopping up of combat, but don't hit quite so hard.
Just sort of wanted to see if this made a difference. We'll see if the smiting and casting spells. Oh, now, so this time he got quite a lot of flagellates.
Good roll, yeah. So that's it's like about 10 maybe.
Yeah, and the smites are working
at 9. Smites are an underrated weapon, honestly. Well, we say smite, but whatever the holy direct damage spell is.
The national smite you get depending on your magic choices. And look at that. Yeah. It's over. So highly effective. How
many kills did the war altar get there out of interest? 4 is, considering that probably at least 2 of those would be knights, which are pretty rough to fight. That does make quite a big difference to avoiding. No, I wouldn't use him in expansion or anything, but I don't think that a Holy 3 is by any means useless in kind of early wars.
Well, I didn't start buying them until I had basically gotten a full selection of each of the magic paths I felt I'd want. And see, and again, here we have the demigriffs. Only 9 of them left, and they just annihilate a fairly good size army. Yeah. There's nothing special to them. Well, I shouldn't say nothing special. They have a lot of weapons. Yeah. And
the most exciting thing. Yeah, I think it's that, again, it's this layers of defense in that they've got. I don't think they have particularly good. Yeah, there's not much repel there, but
no, but they've got a shield and
decent defense because of the tight shield.
Yeah.
And then very good protection.
Huge protection. Yeah.
And then, of course, they're size 3, not size 4, like a lot of monstrous cavalry would tend to be. They're very good. They're quite expensive, though. I think
but you only get 1 a turn. So it takes you quite a while to build them up. But I started using them as soon as I could put 5 together. Before you could probably do it, but 5 worked quite well. So that was sort
of... You can mix them in with other knights, but they're a little bit slower from what I remember, so they lag behind a bit. But that can be good because it means they won't ever get caught by lance charges and things. I think they're 18 in the combat. The knights are 20, or maybe not. No, same speed.
No. Yeah. They might be slower than the knights from the statues.
I think that depends which order.
No,
18. They're 18s. Yeah, I think the hunters. They're like 22, faster. 24.
I must have killed them off. I had some of them. I should just buy some here quick.
So if you make a second purchase of a statue, and you don't get the unique leader that you got the first time. They're kind of like
you
a hero
don't?
unit.
Oh,
No,
okay.
but you do get a replacement leader. So if you show that, then you can see what that looks like. But you do still get the full amount of knights.
Oh, okay. All right, let's just buy another one here. So these guys just keep tearing along, hardly touched by anything. I mean, they've taken some afflictions, but that's not a particular problem. Buy a little bit of province defense here. And this bunch, they should be able to handle one more province. Oops.
Something you mentioned earlier is that the nation has a lot of options. It's got a lot of troop options, and then this one particularly has a huge, like really massive variety of mages. And that's something that I've heard in feedback quite a bit, and I have to be a little bit careful with the balance of the Warhammer nations, because let's say that I balance every individual unit, every individual mage, roughly correctly to the level of power and dominions. So they cost about the right amount of gold and so on. They're similar to things in dominions. If I do that, but then you have 20 different types of troop, and you have 12 different types of commander, and you're comparing them to a dominions nation where they've got maybe 4 commanders that are actually worth building, and they've got maybe 6 different troops that you would actually consider building. And just by virtue of having so many more options, the nation's going to be significantly stronger.
It is, because it gives you more flexibility. You don't have to worry about your matchups against a human opponent as much. Some matchups, I've got a late age Atlantis game, and they're awesome if you can fight in cold, and they're awesome against a lot of things, but there are definitely very poor matchups. I notice here that we've just about eaten up the Blazing Sun Knights. So
yeah, I'm not surprised you lost some against the barbarians.
Well, only 8. I knew I didn't really have enough, but I thought I'd just see how they do. I'm going to turn the W key off.
Interesting thing with barbarians that I find is, so this is actually a good example. That's mostly Maul barbarians. I think there's very few with the greatswords.
Yes.
And I find a huge difference in how dangerous they are between the greatsword ones and the Maul ones. Like, you wouldn't expect from the stats, but if you get one that's mostly greatswords, it is so much nastier.
I think that's got to do with slashing versus blunt weapons. There's been a lot of talk about rebalancing blunt, in that blunt kind of loses out overall.
It's the worst out of the 3.
Yeah, and slashing and pierce are significantly more effective. So there's been talk about maybe blunt should have a stun effect if it hits the head, or something along those lines. If you wanted to be somewhat realistic, big blunt weapons have a tendency to break shield arms. If you smack a big maul against a wooden shield, you're not going to hurt the shield, but it's quite likely you'll cripple the arm behind it.
Yeah, and I think, if you're talking about people wearing lots of armor, then obviously weapons in the kind of medieval period around then, the age of this kind of melee combat, were very much built just to kind of be heavy and not really...
That's right.
Not to chop, but just to kind of deliver shock and break bones and
exactly.
Stay people.
Yeah, and that's debilitating, and takes them out of the fight. So I noticed, I'm not sure why, but the map move seems to be crazy. Because 16 is not amazing.
Have a look at them. I think it's this map. I think that there's roads built into this map.
Oh, yes, there's roads all over the place. You're right. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. I mean, 16 is, or I think it's, maybe they got 16 or 18. Well, either way, it's
16. Well, the army is showing as 16. The complete army on the commander, you can see the 16 there.
All right, yeah. Maybe one of them's. I don't know why that is. I thought they had 18.
I think you're right. Well, the troops might. No, it was the combat speed's 18. The map move is 16.
A map move 16. Sorry, that's my mistake. So 16's okay. You're going to get some 2 province moves and things like that, but it's kind of pretty standard for heavy cavalry. I think the roads on this map make it seem really like.
I think you're right. It's the map. I missed that. It's something I actually did like about Dominions 4 when you could build roads. Nowadays, you're totally dependent on the map maker.
I think that actually got a fair bit of... I think they didn't like it Illwinter, and they got a bit of negative feedback as well, because I don't know. You have to make some decisions about which direction you're going to take the number of little details going on in your game. And
Absolutely.
Dominions generally avoids infrastructure, other than like research and building temples and things like that.
Right.
They avoid like upgrading and.
But then they went to the decision of having forts built in multiple stages, so that's kind of odd.
Yeah.
So they
Kind of counter to that, isn't
abstracted it. Yeah. Anyways, I just thought I kind of enjoyed it, but I remember in Dominions 4 there were some of the other things like you could build extra supplies, and most of that I found fairly meaningless.
Yeah, I don't think I ever built anything except roads. They were like add-ons to the castles, but
Yeah.
I think they're in a good place
like
with
the
Dominions
roads.
5. I quite like
I
how
did
map
too.
move works in Dominions 5. I think it's the best iteration of like things being good or bad at moving around. And there's quite a lot of scope for the player to be a little bit skillful, where they know, actually, because of the way these provinces line up, and I've got these troops that are slightly better at marching, so their map move 16 or 18 instead of 14. I can get here, and the enemy army can't.
Yeah, a little more granularity in map move has been a good thing. It's revived a bit of the use of medium infantry. For a while there, medium infantry was more or less useless, and you could do light because javelins were worthwhile, but the medium infantry had little value over heavy because both ended up moving a single province a turn no matter what. Now, sometimes, if you go with mediums, you'll get a 2-province move.
I do think Dominions 5 favours the heavier armour a little bit more now, and it's just something to bear in mind. Like, so an interesting design question that I ask myself when I'm coming up with mods is, in addition to which units, because I'm trying to balance them so that all of the units have their uses, they have their niches. They don't all have to be great, but they all have to do something kind of useful. And sometimes the thing that they do is very niche. But I do try to bear in mind that people are quite trained that what they'll do is they'll make very elite units and they won't use kind of lower tier ones. And the reason for that often is because being able to expand without taking losses is very important. And because the armies that you've built early in the game are ones to expand, those are also the armies that will end up being used in the first war. And being good at beating indie troops means you're also good at beating not very strong but cheap troops that a nation would build. So you've kind of, because of the nature of expansion, you've kind of got these armies that are tailor-made to beat up on anything cheap that you build.
Right.
But I try to make sure that, a lot of Dominions nations, the lower tier guy, the spearman, the kind of light infantry, if they don't have javelins, they tend to be pretty useless because of that. Because if an expansion army runs into them, they'll just go, "Oh yeah, some more indies, yum yum yum," and just chop through them. So I try to make sure that my lower tier units in the mod nations I make have a little bit more to them. Either there's something particularly special about them, or they're a good resource sink, or I just make them cheaper, a little bit cheaper than Dominions nations would typically go with. So I hope that all of these units are kind of would have their uses, and I think they do.
The ones I didn't end up using at all so far are the other 3 cavalry. Partly because so far it's been better to buy the tributes, and these guys I'm not really sure how I would want to use these. Those hand crossbows don't hit very hard. Range is pretty limited,
and no shield. Which is a bit of a drawback. I would say that you would probably be surprised how good they are, though. So something I've noticed recently, people talking about, is that if you build light or medium cavalry and do expansion with it, you'd be surprised how well it can perform just by having the numbers.
Okay.
Problem with the Nobleborn is that it is quite expensive in terms of recruitment points and resources.
Yes, they go
gold
way
cost
up.
is pretty low, but yeah. So, but I think it's possible that the Nobleborn are quite good. And I know you don't like horse archers, like missile cavalry, and in general I would agree. Although in this case they kind of shoot at a very short range with the hand crossbow. It's much less like a thing like the Horse Brothers or something like that. It's more like you leave them unscripted. They run up to the enemy, shoot a couple of shots, and then they just charge in. It's more like a javelin.
The one horse archer I've used quite a lot are the Soromatian Lancers. They have a composite bow, very big range, and sit them on hold and fire, and then when anything gets in, they lance it and they beat the crap out of it. But they're for most nations, they're a heavy cavalry that just happens to have a bow.
Absolutely,
they're not a light cavalry, so they're a bit unique.
There's two other really good ones. There's the apart from camel riders, which are kind of a different thing, but there's
they're kind of odd.
Savaran Guard, I really rate as a unit, and that's for Rugha.
Oh yes,
and just the basic. They're called Barbarian Cavalry for late Tianqi.
Yes, the recruit everywhere ones. Yes.
Yeah, and they are specifically undercosted. You can tell they've just like shaved, 5 or maybe even 10 gold off the cost of them to make them a feature of the nation, which I agree with as a design philosophy. I think that's good.
Yeah, they're highly effective, and so there are the 3 sort of heavy horse archers, I guess you'd say, or medium horse archers. A little bit different because the generic. We just fought some here. I think it was here. No.
There's light cavalry archers, and there's also horse brothers. That's a very common one to run.
Oh, these guys here, horse tribe cavalry are pretty bad. They're pretty bad. But,
yeah, they're not great. Their map move is amazing, though. I will say that for them. It's not always very relevant, but if you do have some, then map move is incredible.
Okay. There was a question I had here regarding some of the units. So these are based on the tabletop. Or are some of these your own inspirations?
It's a little of both. For the most part, I'm using a combination of I've got the kind of army books and things for the tabletop. So as an aside, I've never actually played Warhammer, the tabletop game with miniatures. I don't own any of the miniatures or anything, but I've always found the world quite interesting, and I've always been a fan. Like when I was quite little, I think it was my older brother just gave me one of the Warhammer Army books. I think it was Orcs and Goblins. And it was like really early on, the 2nd edition or whatever of the game. And I absolutely pored over it. I loved that book. And I still, I have the army books, and I like, I kind of, what I'm doing is turning these army books, detailing the lore and also the rules of the various units, and just turning them into Dominion stations. So it's kind of a combination of that. Some of the inspiration I get is from the Warhammer Total War games, which are very good, and again they're an interpretation of the lore and the rules as well. It's kind of various sources, and then sometimes I'll add something that's a little bit different, and I try to draw on the lore, but sometimes I go a little bit outside of it because I feel like something needed to be added for it to work properly in Dominions, but not for the Empire. This is all stuff from the lore.
I was kind of wondering, especially when I looked at the flagellants, because that's such a Dominions game trope, flagellants being the double attack flails. Is that part of the Warhammer, or did you just pull that from?
Those are very close to a Warhammer troop. Yeah, there's like a kind of flagellant that's they go around whipping themselves and talking about the end of the world.
Oh really?
Obviously, it's because a lot of things in Dominions and Warhammer have the same kind of origins and sources, like mythology sometimes, but also just nations from medieval Europe and beyond.
Okay.
And so if you look at Marignon and Ulm, which are the closest to the Empire, there's a lot of source material that they're based on originally is the same stuff. It's, like Ulm also has the thing they call the Zweihander, which is just like the Greatsword. It's the same thing. It's based on the Swiss Landsknechts.
Yes.
And, it's kind of like, in both cases, it's like a fictionalized version of those. It's like turned up to 11, where you're going, oh, these guys had heavy armor. Let's have a nation that's really into like these amazing heavy armor and like big swords and big guys. The Empire kind of plays up the like very colourful nature of these kind of medieval mercenaries and troops. So this is going to be a bit of an obscure one just for people who are really into the lore, but the Empire's made up of these different provinces, and each of them has their own heraldry. And each of the 3 Empire nations, I've tried to get the heraldry onto the individual troops. So if you look at your crossbowman, that's why he's kind of halved into red and yellow.
Okay.
And you've got your halberdier who's halved into blue and red. That's the colours of Altdorf, the city. Reichland. I think it's Altdorf, the city. Yeah, and Reichland, which is the province that it's in, is the kind of cream with a red accent. So they're all
okay.
They're all representing different
What about
provinces.
the? I'm trying to remember the name of. It looks like an iron cross, the dark red shield with the black cross. That's
so that's one of the symbols of the empire. Is again, it's taking on these medieval tropes of kind of the cross, which obviously is a common symbol in lots of cultures, but it's because of Christianity, and a skull because in the medieval period people were intimately familiar with death, and they used a lot of death iconography on religious things and on weapons of war and crests of noble families.
Slight aside, I'm just reading Freakonomics again, if you've ever heard of that book. And he talks about crime rate in there. And one of the interesting things is, we modern people think that a murder rate of 1.5 per 100,000 is high. And he was showing that about 150 years ago in Italy, they had 25 per 100,000 was the murder rate.
Right, yeah.
We really don't realize how much we've made a dent in crime over the past 200-300 years. Prior to that, it was extremely high, and murder was just a commonplace thing. People killing each other in a bar over the price of a beer.
Of course, and a big part of it is kind of environmental factors as well. Interestingly, the scarcity of things, people's diets, things that people are exposed to can make a big difference in these kind of rates of violence between people. A lot of these spikes of extreme violence in history are linked to things like the introduction of much stronger alcohol. That's something that happened in when the Roman Empire was obviously Roman Empire very violent.
Yeah, when they learned to distill besides just brew.
And originally they had quite weak wines. They would dilute their wines with water, and then it became more fashionable to drink these neat wines that are incredibly strong, and it just drove up the rate of violence amongst people quite a bit. But,
and then
a bigger side.
Well, one of my favorite books is The Distant Mirror by Barbara Tuchman of the 14th century, the time of the Black Death. And all of Europe just went into this paroxysm of violence because suddenly there was money and land available everywhere because they died off, so you could just go take it.
Yeah.
So you had people, grabbing themselves a manor and a farm, and just by dint of I had the violent tendencies to take it over.
So, kind of going back to Warhammer, a thing, and very common in Dominions here is that if you ignore the kind of history of the world of Warhammer, it's essentially because it's a war game, it's based on the lore has grown from a war game. So everything in the lore is oriented towards war. There is some kind of role-playing stuff that's more about what's the economy like, what's the religion like, what's the culture like. But mostly it's just kind of revolving around war. And Dominions, of course, is exactly like that. It's these mythologies and sources from different cultures, and they're bent towards the purpose of a war game. So you get to see the kind of war side of all of these cultures, and that's actually one of the reasons that I think Warhammer stuff fits brilliantly well with Dominions, is that it doesn't require, if you're taking inspiration for a mod nation and you're saying I'm going to take the mythology of the Picts, let's say, or maybe some depictions of the Picts from like Caesar's writings about them, or a contemporary historian of some kind.
Okay.
I'm going to adapt that into being this Dominions nation. You have to kind of put everything through a filter of war. With the Warhammer nations, it's already done. So you have all these troops that already exist. You're kind of, they fit very closely. There are elements of it and bits where you have to make more of an adaptation around the magic system being very different, and kind of around sacreds and things like that being quite different.
Right. That makes sense. Yeah, well, I know, people sometimes talk about why or say, does Africa have a fairly limited representation in Dominions? I think there's probably simple answers, like the fact that the Illwinter people are not that familiar with it, or it's harder to get documentation.
I think even if you are familiar, I wouldn't like to say that Christopher doesn't know or hasn't read or studied about various kind of African mythologies and histories. It could honestly just be that it hasn't really taken his fancy as something to turn into a nation in this kind of fantasy war game, which is kind of perfectly understandable. I think that a lot of the, I have a very big instinct of when I see something, and I think a lot of modders are just like me, see something and you immediately go like, "Oh, that'd make a good Dominions nation." When you're like reading
Sure.
about some 16th century mercenary getting up to something or having some strange religious beliefs or something, you're like, "Oh, well, how
Right.
can I turn that into a nation?" But, not everything has to be like that, and I agree. Though it would be nice if there was some kind of more African mythologies and cultures and histories represented, because I think Machaca is quite. It's a very broad brush one. It's
Yes.
It's playing on these sort of common like tropes rather than specific mythologies,
got that
like
bit of a Zulu flavor.
there's some
Or
deepest,
ancient
darkest
Zimbabwe
African stuff.
or sub-Saharan kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But of course, we do have, if you want to use Africa in the broader term, we've got a strong representation of the Mediterranean part of Africa, because we've got all of the stuff around from the Palestinian area. We've got a number of treatments of Arabic nations, different viewpoints. We've kind of got ancient Persia there, which is, Fertile Crescent rather than Africa. And of course, I've done some reading on other stuff related to it, and sub-Saharan Africa was very poorly understood until, quite late. The connections across the Sahara, the trade was very limited, and of course, trying to get through West Africa and get through the Congo, where everybody who is European ends up dying of disease so badly.
And there's a
So on and
natural
so forth.
dismissiveness of these kind of, a lot of the people that were originally going out there, colonizers and empires that were going out there, they were very dismissive of like, this place, they claim that they've had this, kingdom that's been around for 1,000 years. Ridiculous, they're just savages, this kind of...
And yet,
behavior.
it was there. Now we know
of course.
Zimbabwe was, 1,500 years old or something. I'm not an expert on that, but...
Yeah, it's, but this is the problem of, dominant cultural narrative from some other culture that's more militarily powerful in the area than you are. They will often like override and wipe out your culture.
Well, like they say, the history is written by the victors, so...
Yeah, unfortunately.
So we've kind of covered most things. Anything you wanted to kind of sum up in our little 1 hour overview? Any sort of things you want to tell the audience?
So in this case, you've got the Empire mod, and you've looked at one of the nations within it.
Right.
And I just wanted to kind of quickly cover why I broke that into 3 different nations.
Good idea. Good idea.
Quite similar.
Should I pop out?
We can have a look at the other 2.
Oh. Not what I meant to do. I wanted to do the save and quit. I will do that. And just briefly, so the mod is loaded, so I can simply go to create a pretender god and have a quick look at Nuln. So you've got some of the similar things. Oh, I see what looks like a surveyor, master engineer.
Yep.
Okay, and then these
see.
are the tanks what people were talking about. I heard somebody
Yes, people
talking
love
about the
these.
steam tanks. Yeah, that looks
They
fun.
love these, and people love to tell me to make them stronger constantly.
And they look very Da Vinci. There's a funny guy, Lindy Beige. He's a YouTuber. He used to be at Boddington Tank Museum, but he's gone. And he's done a number of videos on some of the strange concepts of armored vehicles from the Middle Ages. And there's things that look very much like this.
Yeah, and a lot of it, Da Vinci, perfect example, is he was saying you could do something like this. Of course, they never built it, but
there was a
lot of
couple
it-
were built and suffered badly from. They actually had no cross-country capability because they were too bloody heavy. And when you only have the ability of horses or men,
So they actually have 2. One of these is based on an actual thing that happened, which is the kind of battle wagon, which I think the Hussites used very successfully, which was kind of just a covered wagon with people with crossbows in it, basically.
there's some examples he showed in some of his videos of a thing like this. And horse-drawn, basically it's just a wagon.
Yeah, it's to give people some cover and, so that you can move supplies and heavier things, and then you can fight from it at the same time.
Absolutely.
I hope they're quite fun, the war wagons. So you've got your war wagons and steam tanks. Nuln is a city, it's kind of another one of these powers within the Empire of Man in the Warhammer world. And they're kind of quite industrial and into, they've got a lot of the armories and forges and things.
Okay.
are in that city, so that's why they've got.
What are these guys? Oh, these are like halflings. Oh,
They are,
okay.
yeah. So
Yeah.
Warhammer's
Short bow.
halflings are called halflings. They live in the Moot, which is this little province within the Empire that's like
Oh,
they do
okay.
most of the farming,
Right,
like the breadbasket of the Empire.
So-
and that is nearer to Nuln. Like I split the provinces of the Empire up and attached them to these different cities:
Okay.
Altdorf, Nuln, and Middenheim. So they kind of represent the west
and
bit of
these
the
are-
Empire, the south bit of the Empire, and the north bit of the Empire, pretty much.
These are a blatant knockoff of Tolkien's Shire, and they like food and drink, and okay, there you go. And you've got the heraldry change to the greens. Greens.
Yep. So you've got some of the blacks and whites is Nuln. The yellow is Stirland, I think.
Okay.
There's some kind of greens and yellows. The
Okay.
spearman is in the Stirland heraldry, and then you've got Stir River heraldry and various other ones.
And we've got
But
Outrider,
basically,
which
you've
is
got these.
very, very similar to the Nobleborn.
He is, but he's
Short.
much more of a missile unit because he can shoot. He's got more than like 1 or 2 ammo. He's more of
Right.
an actual horse archer, and the
And a
repeater
range
crossbow is quite
18.
similar.
Right.
Yeah, a bit more range.
Okay. Are they
But
as
then
diverse magically? It looks like it. They've got very.
they are.
Yeah, they've got the Death, Astral.
They have the same mages, however, the mages are priced slightly differently, representing
okay.
the different kind of political alignments in the different areas.
Okay.
So Nuln gets on very well with gold mages and
Okay.
amethyst mages. They're very powerful in that city, but then bright mages and celestials and greys are less powerful in the city, so they cost a bit more. I think one of them's slow to recruit. I may have that wrong, but and they've also got a scholar who's slightly different.
I'm not seeing any slow to recruits except the Arc
Oh, there we go. That's the Art Collector, yeah.
Okay.
They don't have the
Well, very quickly, I'm just going to open up Middenheim.
The Middenheim's
So-
the northern bit, and it encompasses. I've added the kind of allied forces from Kislev, which is kind of the Novgradian or Russian equivalent in the Warhammer world, and they're an ally of the Empire, so they get some Kislev things. They get an Ice Mage and some Kislevite.
Oh, and look, so, okay. So these are a little bit of a flavor of Rus, the Rus nations. Oh, Wolffather. Is he a shapeshifter? No.
No, they just worship the wolf.
Okay.
They don't have any magical powers. But and you've also got Winged Lancers, which is obviously were very popular in. I think the original Winged Lancers are Polish, and then there's other kind of.
Oh, I see.
I'm now going to get a historian telling me that's absurd. They were from somewhere else.
Whatever.
They're famous,
Yeah,
the Polish
yeah.
Winged Lancers. And
Yeah,
I think there were
okay.
Russian Winged Lancers and Lithuanian Winged Lancers as well. But
Okay, so they're, I would call them a medium cavalry.
medium, like lance charge cavalry.
Right,
Yeah, getting
right.
a lance on a 30 gold thing is quite exciting.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Okay. And then we lose the Debigriffs, but we keep the Order. And these guys. Oh, composite bows for 22. And a falchion.
Terrible armor though,
Yeah.
0 protection.
Yeah, okay. So,
A
Mongols.
fantastic combat speed and map move, can be quite useful.
Oh my gosh. Yes. Okay. Interesting. Okay.
So
Well-
you've got different variants of a very similar nation, but hopefully giving people a bit of different flavour, and it lets you do a kind of a civil war scenario as well, which is nice.
Okay. We are coming on to the hour, and I think that was a good coverage. Similar to what I did Dark Elves, I think we've sort of done an overview of the Empire Nation mod, and that's sufficient for the time being. Probably next I will try another one of your mods, and I've got a couple other people interested in doing similar things, so we'll go from there. So thank you very much for your time, Sombre.
You're welcome. It's good fun. We should
Yeah.
talk again, and I
Yeah,
hope
we
people
will.
watching enjoy. Let us know in the comments.
Yeah, we seem to be getting a fair bit of viewing. It's a relatively small group of the people, but then, and I'm going to make a little shout out, we now have the new forum for modding, or the new Discord for modding. That's doing very well. I'm very pleased with sort of the idea that this is just for mods, and we'll leave it at that. All right. Well, have a good day, everybody.
Thanks everyone.
Bye-bye.